In Virginia, where the state House is Republican and the state Senate is Democratic and the governor is Republican, the partisan bickering from books in school to critical race theory is never ending. But one issue brought everyone together: ending cruelty to dogs at the Envigo breeding facility. A PETA undercover investigation exposed Envigo in Virginia, and then a unanimous legislature took a stand against Envigo's cruel practices. How PETA changed the laws in Virginia. Next on the PETA Podcast. Welcome to the PETA Podcast. I'm Emil Guillermo, your host for this inside look at animal rights, brought to you by PETA, the largest animal rights organization in the world. On today's episode, when a PETA undercover investigation at Envigo, a Virginia dog breeding facility, documented massive amounts of cruelty, including 360 dead dogs in a 7-month period, it was clear new, stronger, tougher laws were needed. At PETA's prompting, the Virginia legislature found the issue to bridge the political divide, unanimously passing 5 new laws that protect the animals and hold companies like Envigo accountable. PETA's Daphna Nachminovich, Senior Vice President of Cruelty Investigations, talks about how the battle was won and what it means for Virginia and potentially other states on the PETA Podcast. Daphna, last year, you had this undercover investigation of a company called Envigo, which was based in Virginia, and they bred beagles to sell to laboratories. This year, you were at a news conference with all these legislators and a lot of beagles and the governor who signed into law 5 beagle protection bills. Now, that's quite a journey for 1 year to go from undercover investigation to 5 beagle protection bills in one session with unanimous support. I mean, has it happened before? I mean, at any time from your years of following the legislature there in Virginia?
It has not to my knowledge. It's certainly been an intense and wild ride. So in this course of 1 year, essentially, we conducted the investigation, released the investigation, filed the USDA complaint, worked with the USDA on their investigation, and then worked with legislators before the first of the year to come up with most of the bills that were introduced, lobbied for the 11 that were introduced, and then, of course, we were ecstatic when the 5 were passed unanimously. And it sounds like everything sailed through very smoothly. There were certainly some bumps along the way. There was a lot of opposition from the company, a lot of opposition. And so we are extremely ecstatic. This isn't just, obviously it's wonderful progress for the state of Virginia, but it's also a first. It's a historic first. So for this industry, it sends a very strong message. And what some of these bills do is absolutely groundbreaking.
What's really amazing is that without the investigation, this never would have happened. Without PETA's undercover investigation to really find out what's going on at a place like Envigo, this never would have gotten to this stage at all. Or would it have?
It absolutely wouldn't have. And that's part of the reason that we went in there, to have a look and see if animals were neglected, abused, if they were suffering. We had tried to get a bill passed in 2020, and that bill was tabled. And at that time, the company said it would submit to voluntary inspections by the state of Virginia. That went absolutely nowhere. There was one informational visit, and that's the term used by state officials here in Virginia, not my term, but we went from being promised, advocates and animal rights activists being promised that there would be voluntary inspections and that there would be legislation introduced the following session, to essentially one informational visit by one person who was specifically told it's not an inspection, it's a visit. There were no notes generated. The company had plenty of notice when advocates had been promised that visits would be announced no less than 24 hours before they took place. So we knew that if we didn't go in there and get the goods to show people what was actually going on when the company did not have the opportunity to put it in the light it wanted to put it in, that we would be in a position to educate legislators on the reality.
Yeah, and I just want to make sure people understand that when you went in there, it was an undercover investigation. So you were able to catch red-handed Envigo doing all these things that they said they weren't doing, or things that they never admitted to doing. But now, in an undercover fashion, you were able to find out the truth. I mean,
that's exactly right.
Yeah, that's pretty astonishing.
Yes, and if it weren't for the fact that we had captured photographs and video of our findings and shared those with legislators, no doubt there wouldn't have been movement on the legislative front.
See, this is the thing, because, you talk about investigative journalism, and PETA is not, it's an animal welfare, animal rights organization. It's not necessarily journalistic, but it goes in, it gets the truth, it gets the facts, it goes undercover. And a newspaper would have been happy if they were able to get an undercover investigation and find this stuff. And yet now we see the real importance of the undercover investigative teams and, ability of PETA right here in this instance of Envigo.
Absolutely. And, one thing that is really important to note as well is that the findings of our undercover investigation through these visuals made very clear to legislators that they had been misled. And I'm being generous with that term, that they were lied to by the company, that things were not okay. And so during session, it was quite interesting to see, what the company had to say. And of course, not surprisingly, they simply pointed the finger at COVID, which was just a pathetic excuse because, obviously COVID impacted everybody, but COVID is 2 years old now, and a dog's gestation period is 63 days. So if you can't do the math on when to stop breeding, if you're not selling, that's pretty pitiful. This is a $545 million company that was recently purchased by a $1.2 billion company. And, the way that they present themselves on their website and to the industry is a far cry from what we found and what we exposed.
So this is Envigo, and we've just given people the overview about what the investigation did and what the legislature did. So now let's get into more about Envigo. What is this place, Envigo? What do? They breed beagles to sell to laboratories. Why was it so disturbing to legislators?
Right. So this particular site in Cumberland, Virginia, breeds beagles to sell to laboratories. They also hold a few dozen cats for experimentation. This is a facility that, as of July of 2021, had 5,035 dogs and puppies, all beagles, on site. And our investigation revealed that animals were deprived of veterinary care for very painful, serious conditions and injuries, ear infections, skin infections, bladder infections, injuries that they had inflicted on each other in fights because of the poor housing. Tails and limbs and ears were pulled through the side walls, and then animals were left without veterinary care. Our investigator documented that animals were hosed in the cages with cold water from high pressure hoses. She also found that over the course of her shifts alone, during the 7 months of her employment, she found more than 360 dead puppies. And that mirrored the findings of the USDA, which I'll get to in a minute. And one of the other things that we uncovered, which was so distressing, was that the facility had an SOP of withholding food from nursing mother dogs for 2 days before their litters were taken from them. And that is cruelty to animals, plain and simple.
So SOP, standard operating procedure, it's in their policies. They withhold food. That's what they did.
It was there. It was that was their protocol for weaning the puppies from the mother, is withholding food for up to 48 hours. And those poor mother dogs were famished. And that was part of our complaint to the USDA. But one of the things about that practice is that when the USDA, and that the USDA is the US Department of Agriculture, it enforces the Federal Animal Welfare Act. While PETA was undercover at Envigo, the USDA, unrelated to PETA, went in July of 2021 and told Envigo that they could not do that. They could not withhold the food from the mother dogs for 2 days, that it caused the animals distress and suffering, and that they could not do that. And so PETA's undercover investigator documented that the facility continued to do that, despite being told by the federal government that they mustn't. And not only that, she was instructed to lie to federal officials when they returned, and there is documentation of that. And one of the most upsetting things we got from a Freedom of Information Act request, some of the visuals from the inspection of the USDA from July, and it shows a desperately hungry mother dog pawing and trying to get to the kibble in the feeder that's pinned onto the outside of the cage. And so just to describe to listeners, the feeders, that usually they're facing the cage, so the dog can it's an automatic feeder. And the way that the facility deprived these dogs of food, they just turned the feeder around. And so these poor dogs could see the food, they could smell the food, but they couldn't get to it. And there's just no greater punishment. Here's a famished mother, a nursing mother dog who can't even get a piece of kibble, and she's yet expected to nourish a litter of, multiple puppies. So that was one of the most chilling things. And I think legislators were deeply upset by that, and rightfully so.
And so your undercover investigator documented all this, turned it over to legislators. It's essentially evidence in video form, pictures. And what was their reaction? What was their reaction when they saw this?
So the way it works is we broke our undercover investigation with this information in November of 2021, and I started meeting with legislators in Virginia, where we're based here in Norfolk, to try and get legislation introduced for the 2022 session, which in Virginia is just basically January, February, and the first half of March, and was able to get some commitments from legislators that they would introduce bills. And as it turned out, there were bills filed that we didn't even know would be filed, because there was so much press around this. The Washington Post covered our investigation. We were on national television about the investigation, and we had multiple outlets here in Virginia cover it, as well as the USDA violations. And so our legislators were upset by that. And thankfully, by January 11th, when session started, almost a dozen bills were filed that did different things.
Wow. So, did you think, why do you suppose, because you've done undercover investigations before, but why do you think there was this overwhelming response to this? Does it have to do with how the company mistreated the animals so much, or was it more the fact that we were dealing with dogs, we're dealing with beagles?
I think both. I think the fact that it was dogs, certainly both sides of the aisle in Virginia, and I would imagine everywhere else, dogs do bring people together. So regardless of political affiliation, legislators, decent people, were upset by that. There were some legislators who were, who have shown dedication to this issue since 2020 when it first came. And those legislators especially felt fooled, because some of them actually had gone to the facility to visit with notice. And so what they saw when they were given a visit by the facility, a tour, and what we exposed in our undercover video obviously made them feel as if they had been deceived. But I also think the extent and severity of the violations and the conditions that we uncovered and the USDA corroborated were inexplicable and inexcusable. And if any other person or entity in the state of Virginia had committed those crimes, really, they would have been prosecuted. But Virginia code was written so as to exempt animals regulated by federal law for the purpose of research And that's one of the things that our bills did, is that they now include these beagles under the Virginia code so that they are afforded protections. And this facility now has to provide basic duties of ownership, something they were exempted from before.
How could they have been exempted? Was that just a matter of their lobbyists being more powerful than the animal rights lobbyists? Or how could they not be held accountable for things or be excused?
It's a great question. That's a great question. That's the way that the definition had been written. And last time around in 2020, when we tried to do this, the company did get its lobbyists to amend a definition to specifically exempt facilities that breed for experimentation from the commercial dog breeding requirements in Virginia. And so it's a loophole, it was a loophole that was simply left alone for many, many years. And thanks to our work, it's now closed.
Yeah. Well, all right. So you had 12 bills that were introduced. You ended up with 5 beagle protection bills. What did each bill do? Take us through did all 12 bills get boiled down into 5, or how did that work out in the end?
It's a great question. So there was a total of 11 bills. I said, yes, almost 12, 11, and some of them were duplicative. So those bills were filed in both the House and the Senate, so both chambers. And so really, at the end of the day, our concerns are encapsulated in the 5 bills that passed and have been signed by the governor. The session was it's very quick. There are thousands of bills being introduced. So this is sort of, everything moves very quickly. Everything is 24/7, and things happen, from one second to the other. So the 5 bills that we ended up with, that some of them go into effect July 1st of this year, and some of them go into effect July 1st of next year. And a lot of negotiation and a lot of talks went on behind closed doors, but we are, the bills will make a difference for these animals. And so what they do, just to go through them, 2 of the 5 are identical. One was a House bill and one was the Senate bill. And legislators really referred to this bill as the kill switch bill. And what that bill does is that on or after the date that it becomes effective, if Envigo has a critical violation, is cited for a critical violation by the USDA, or a direct violation, a single one, or 3 non-critical, non-direct violations. If that happens on or after July 1st of 2023, then the company can no longer sell animals for 2 years, which really is, that is the kill switch. And those are the bills that the company lobbied most heavily against. There was a lot of discussion about the effective date. The bills, one of the bills had been, someone put a reenactment clause on it, which essentially means the bill really just passes for show but doesn't go into effect. We got the reenactment clause off. We got an effective date of March 1st, 2023. And then when the company flew in its CEO and other top level executives, we agreed, because they were doing some very heavy lobbying against these bills, we just agreed that they could have an extra 4 months, that we would give them an extra 4 months if they would just back off. And that's what ended up happening.
But basically these bills are, if Envigo is found in violation of any of these things, they can't do business. I mean,
correct.
It shuts them off from their means of profiting, and
exactly, which is all they care about. So that was really the bill. Those 2 bills, the House version and the Senate version, were the bills that they were lobbying most heavily against. And getting that reenactment clause off of the Senate bill was vital. And then we have a bill that requires them to submit to the state on a quarterly basis some incredibly detailed records, which include the number of births, the number of deaths, acquisition records, all records that they're already required to keep by the Animal Welfare Act. But they have to submit those records to the state now every 3 months, and those records will then be public record. So we will be able to learn we'll be able to monitor, hopefully, some of the data of the numbers and be able to see, are 360 puppies still dying over the course of 7 months, or have things improved?
So it's really the bills provide scrutiny and provide a way to get at accountability. And all of this did not exist until PETA exposed just how bad things were at Envigo. I mean, it's amazing that now they have to do all these things, and they can't be happy that they now have to up their game on the ethical side, right?
Right, absolutely. And they were not, yes, right. They were not happy about that bill either, and tried to tell legislators it was, private business information and on and on. But the thing is that they have, this facility in Cumberland, Virginia has been operating under the radar since 1961. So this has been more than 60 years, 6 decades of tremendous animal suffering behind closed doors. And I think thanks to PETA's investigation and the USDA inspection reports, we were able to make the case that transparency was paramount, and it was time to pass some laws that would require them to submit records, just like other entities in Virginia have to submit records to the state vet.
Yeah, I mean, what's incredible is that, barring this and barring the PETA investigation, one has to assume that a standard way of doing business was cruelty at Envigo.
100%. 100%. When you have the USDA uncovered the deaths of 300 puppies in about 7 months, and our investigation found more than 360 dead puppies in 7 months. Some of those months overlap. And one of the USDA citations was based on the fact that Envigo had made no effort to figure out why the mortality rate was so sky high. And the only answer to that is that they just considered that the cost of doing business. There was no interest for animal welfare. There was, there's a lot of a big show put on about animal welfare on their website and what they tell the public at large and their customers. But the reality for those dogs day in and day out is that it's just a massive factory farm prison where these dogs are deprived not only of everything dogs need to be happy, exercise and love and attention and toys, and they don't even have a name at this facility, but they were deprived of basic necessities of life. And that's why we were able to get all of these bills passed.
So what were the dogs dying of in that great number? Was it just, was it deprivation of care? Was it, what was there a disease, through the lab? What do you think?
Well, that's a good question. I think part of what was going on is that the conditions were so deplorable. And one of the citations by the USDA, which was repeated more than once, was that there was woefully inadequate staffing at the facility. And so you have 5,000 dogs and puppies and 17 human beings who are tasked with taking care of them. You're going to miss things. You're going to miss that a puppy fell into the drain. You're going to miss that, animals are injured. Those animals weren't getting the very basic observation that they needed in order to survive the conditions.
Yeah. Is this one of those things where it couldn't have been rectified, or it couldn't have been fixed unless the legislators got involved, that the legislators had to get involved?
Oh, that's certainly the way I feel, because I don't see the USDA swooping in and doing its job. I mean, there are citations. There are 73 citations since July of 2021, but there's no enforcement action yet. So yeah. Not a single dog has been confiscated. Their license hasn't been suspended. So yes, we have very detailed inspection reports and we know how awful it is, but no action has been taken by this federal agency to actually render aid to a single animal. And that was part of the reason our legislators here in Virginia were motivated to act, because they were so frustrated with the lack of action by the USDA.
But they needed your investigation first before. I mean, they couldn't just rely on what the USDA had reported or what their investigation, because nothing happened. Or were they just waiting? Or what?
No, I mean, no, I think, with legislation, a lot of the time the legislators are introducing bills at the request of constituents and advocates. And that's what happened here. I mean, I definitely think that, we played a huge role in getting some of these bills introduced, and most certainly, helping to ensure that the language covered what it needed to cover and that it was meaningful. Without our input on those things, and most certainly without the visuals from that investigation, which, are indisputable and so compelling and so tragic. I think the inspiration for these bills and the unity we saw around them was unprecedented. And, we had legislators posting on social media every day, legislators showing up to the hearings with their, beagle ties and dog socks, and, and there was agreement that the place was horrible. And it was very refreshing to hear some of the things that legislators said simply based on the articles that they had read, saying, I was appalled. I was appalled by the conditions, and they're in the position to take action. So we're so appreciative and thankful that they did the right thing. And certainly the unanimous support is, it's unheard of to, to see that, especially in this day and age. And in Virginia, the politics are a bit tricky right now. The House is controlled by Republicans. The Senate is controlled by Democrats. The governor is there's a lot of political conflict and friction in Virginia. So to see people coming together for that ceremony was, my heart was full.
Well, it's something, considering that nationwide, when people look at Virginia and they hear about all the discussion about what's going on in the schools and critical race theory and all these divisive issues that have been brought up by one side in particular, and it's not true or it is true, but there is some very divisive politics in Virginia. Yes. And to see people come together because of dogs, because of animal cruelty, because, it really
and ultimately is. Because it's the right thing, it was the right thing to do this stuff. And it was a really wild ride, it was very intense. It was really an intense 2 months. It's obviously been an intense year, but the legislative session it just moves at breakneck speed. And, you can't really turn your back for a second, because then, a lobbyist goes behind your back and tells a legislator something that isn't necessarily true, but may change their mind. So it was just nonstop. The train was going 100 miles an hour.
Is it precedent setting in the way that PETA is going to approach legislation at the state level in the future?
Probably. This just happened, so we don't quite know our next steps, but I think it is a template for other states to follow, especially if you have a repeat offender like Envigo was here in Virginia. I think that the bills that got passed are very, very reasonable. That was part of the reason for the unanimous support, is that we really weren't asking for much. We were just asking for compliance with the Federal Animal Welfare Act. Why is that so much to ask? Why can't a $545 million company comply with the survival standards of the Animal Welfare Act? And why is our federal government not holding them accountable when they don't? And so I think our legislators, were moved by that. And then the next thing people were it really created, the bills and the information and the handouts and the video and the photos. We really had a movement within the General Assembly to try and rectify this. And I should go over the other bills right quick. One of the bills requires that animals determined as quote unquote surplus animals be afforded a chance to be adopted. And so that has resulted so far in about 400 dogs being released for adoption from the facility. And almost 12 of those dogs were present at the signing ceremony. And that was, so heartwarming to see them, knowing that they were born at that hellhole and were raised in that hellhole. And now we're free. And we hope, all of them get that opportunity. And then one of the bills, it was, what we discussed, which is amending the definition of companion animal in the state of Virginia to include animals who are bred for experimental purposes. And that was a huge victory for us to get that done.
Because it means that a rat or a bird or some animal that was seen as an experiment, for, was experimental media or used for experiments. Suddenly you have to see them as no different from your dog or your cat.
Well, unfortunately, that bill just applies to dogs and cats, not other animals, but it does afford the dogs and cats protections that they didn't previously have. And I think it also, the significance of that was that we no longer defer to the USDA. We have our state laws and these people have to comply with them, period.
Well, so now if this works as a model for other states to say, redefine what animals are protected or not protected, does this change or have the potential of changing the laboratory animal breeding business nationwide? Or does it mean that there will be some states that are very tough or tougher than they were, like Virginia, and some states that are going to be like, well, same old, same old. They could do whatever they want.
Sure. I mean, it also depends on what the definition is presently. In Virginia, we had, again, a definition with this massive loophole in there that exempted dogs, even though they are dogs, from the definition of companion animal because they were being bred to be experimented on. And our view certainly is that doesn't mean that they should have more protection, not less protection, if that's the case. So that was a significant step forward, closing that loophole, because that was part of what we tried to do in 2020 and did not succeed at the time because of the facility and its high-priced lobbyists.
Yeah. So once again, the bigger, the most important of the laws is in effect this summer, right?
So 3 of the laws go into effect this summer, July 1st, 2022. The record keeping one is important. And then basically the facility has now 15 months to come into compliance with the Federal Animal Welfare Act. And if they continue to violate it as flagrantly as they have been, they will lose their ability to do business in Virginia and they will have to go.
Would they simply just say, look, this is too stringent. We're just going to go to another animal research friendly state?
That is a possibility. I don't know how easy it is to set up a situation like that. This facility has been around since 1961. It's 320 plus acres. I would hope that they just get out of the dog breeding business. I wish that it would have gone into effect, this year, but I don't think that would have passed.
Well, the other question is, it gives them some time to either fix things or to clean up their act. But yes, it also gives them time to plan to maybe get out or to maybe defeat the legislation with counter legislation that undoes it.
Well, good luck with that.
Yeah. I mean, you're always going to
see that happening.
You're always going to have to deal with that, but you're ready to fight.
I'm ready to fight. And not that I particularly believe these people when they give their word, but part of what the agreement was, if we allowed an extra 4 months for the bills to go into effect that would shut them down if they don't comply, is that they do not come back next year with legislation to reverse this. But honestly, they would fail miserably if they did. So, and I'm very ready to fight again.
Well, that's so great. I saw those pictures of you and the legislators and their dogs, and it must have felt really gratifying in the end that, you'd climbed Everest, right? That was it.
I very well said. Yes, that's about right. And it felt incredible. It was a wonderful day. It was the best day ever.
Well, for an animal activist, I know all the things, well, not all the things, but I know of many of the great things that you do there at PETA, and it's good to have a victory and to share that victory.
Yeah, it was good. It was a hard-fought battle. It was a long time coming, and it was, it was a lot. It was, it wasn't evident that we would come out with the way that we did, but I think even half of the bills that passed would have made a difference. So to get really, everything essentially that we went in asking for, is incredibly rewarding, but it's also just the industry and the way that it treats living sentient beings, and this message being our state sees these animals as living sentient beings. And if you're going to breed them and sell them to be tortured in laboratories, the least you can do is X. I mean, we see so much, as you know, and there's so many challenges with this industry and others. And so to have legislators on the animal side with this, and to have advocates united, we created a coalition of organizations from across the state that testified and spoke and lobbied. And it was just, it was a very positive thing to stand united against this evil company. There was not a single constituent in the state of Virginia who told their legislator not to vote for these bills.
As you being senior vice president of cruelty investigations at PETA, it has to be, it's not the end. I mean, you have many more great investigations to come, I'm sure, but
I hope so.
it has to feel like, this is what it's all, this is why you do the things you do.
Yeah, it's a good feeling to have accomplished this is a good feeling. Definitely. Legislation is tough,
Yeah.
So it's a good victory, and I'm thrilled for the dogs who've come out, and I hope they all come out really soon, and we're never going to stop fighting for them.
And of course, listeners, if they want to find out more about Envigo, where can they go?
Oh, please come to PETA.org. We have our investigation information, but we have a very important action alert up targeting the USDA, asking them to suspend the license of Envigo and confiscate suffering animals. And I should mention that U.S. Senator Kaine and U.S. Senator Warner, who are Virginia's senators in the U.S. Senate, sent a joint letter to the USDA Administrator, Kevin Shea, asking for aggressive enforcement action and a suspension and eventual revocation of their license at Envigo, a very strong letter. And that information is on our website. And if you live in Virginia, please join us in thanking these two senators for doing the right thing and speaking out.
So essentially, you got the state legislation, and the legislature passed the state laws, but now you got to work on the feds. The USDA.
Right. Absolutely. So we had a letter go from 7 members of Congress to the USDA, and then Senator Kaine and Senator Warner sent a separate letter that's really worth reading.
Yeah. So you can't stand on your laurels. The work continues on the federal level now.
Yeah, there's no such thing at PETA anyway.
So, well, look, Daphna, congratulations again
Thank you, Emil.
On the undercover investigation that led to real change, real news. The legislature passed those 5 bills, and now you're going after the feds to make sure at the federal level, Envigo is held accountable. Really an amazing accomplishment, and we'll see if the federal aspect of this gets taken care of too.
Yeah, we're not asking much, just for them to do their job,
Yeah, that's right. Thank you very much, Daphna.
Thanks, Emil.
PETA's Daphna Nachminovich, Senior VP of Cruelty Investigations, on the tremendous victory in the Virginia legislature for the animals. For more on the Envigo case and the 5 laws that resulted from that PETA undercover investigation, and to see just exactly how PETA made state laws tougher, go to PETA.org, where you can also find out how PETA is urging the feds to enforce the federal laws as well. Once again, go to PETA.org for more. And that's our show for today. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to send a link of this show to your friends. Tell them you like the PETA podcast. You can contact us at PETA.org. You can find me on Twitter at Emil Amok. That's EMILAMOK. Or see my vlog at amok.com. Or see my work, my writing at ALDEF, the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund. That's ALDEF, AALDEF.org/blog. Once again, thank you for listening. Check out all our episodes on your favorite podcast app or on Apple Podcasts, where you can subscribe to as well as rate and review the show. It helps get the word out about the issues you care about. Our music is provided by Carbon Works. Check them out on YouTube. And join us again next time for more insight into animal rights and the fight for a cruelty-free world on the PETA Podcast. I'm Emil Guillermo.